Think of the last conversation where you walked away, feeling like you didn't say what you meant, where you felt unheard, even while you were speaking. Let that sit for a moment. Because most people carry that quiet frustration every day and never ask why. They assume it's just who they are. Shy, awkward, not a people person, bad at expressing themselves. Those labels feel like armor, but that armor is exactly what keeps them stuck. Here's the truth nobody tells you. None of that is personality. It's a skill gap, and a skill gap can be closed. A personality can't. That difference changes everything. I spent 15 years in boardrooms where communication decided who got promoted and who got quietly shelved. I watched brilliant people lose to ordinary people who simply knew how to speak, how to listen, how to pause. I learnt this the hard way. My own communication almost cost me my marriage before it cost me my career. So I rebuilt it, piece by piece, not through charisma seminars, through architecture. This audiobook gives you 7 specific, simple, immediately practical ways to close those gaps. Not techniques that need years of study. 7 ways you can use today in your very next conversation. To speak with more clarity, listen with more presence, connect with more precision than you did yesterday. No promises of charisma, no becoming someone you're not. Just 7 skills, 1 mindset, and 1 daily habit that decides whether the next 10 years of your relationships look like the last 10 or something entirely different. Chapter 1. Your communication can change, but first, this mindset must. Before any of the 7 skills ahead of you can work, 1 piece of internal wiring has to shift. If it does not shift, you can listen to every chapter of this audiobook, take notes, nod along, and still walk into your next conversation the same person you were before. That is not motivation talking. That is structure. The truth is, learning does not change behavior. Belief changes behavior. And most people are carrying a belief about communication that quietly guarantees they will never improve. The belief sounds like this: some people are just born good at talking. Some people are naturally charismatic. Some people just have that ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel seen. And then the second half of the belief, the part people rarely say out loud: I am not one of them. That is the sentence that decides everything. Because if you believe communication is a personality trait, then trying to improve it feels like trying to change your height. Pointless, frustrating, slightly humiliating. So most people never try. They tell themselves they are introverted, or private, or just not good with words, and they build a whole identity around that story. This is where most people stop, not because they cannot improve, but because they decided the door was locked before they ever tried the handle. Here is what the evidence actually shows. Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford, spent decades studying the difference between what she called a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. Her research, published in her book Mindset in 2006 and cited in thousands of studies since, found something that applies directly to communication. People who believed their abilities were fixed traits performed worse over time across all measurable skill areas. People who believed their abilities could grow through practice improved faster, recovered from failure more quickly, and eventually outperformed those who started ahead of them. The belief was not a side factor. The belief was the engine. Communication is the clearest example of this in daily life. You have been speaking since you were roughly 2 years old. You have been listening in some form your whole life, which means you have somewhere around 3 or 4 decades of practice already, most of it accidental. If that practice were going to make you a great communicator by itself, it would have done so by now. The reason most people plateau is not lack of exposure, it is lack of deliberate attention. Abraham Lincoln understood this. So did every professional negotiator, therapist, teacher, and leader whoever became genuinely good at their craft, the person whose communication you admire, did not wake up one day knowing how to speak with clarity or listen with warmth. They practiced, awkwardly at first, repeatedly, in small conversations that nobody would ever remember. That is how the skill was built, not through personality, through repetition. Now here is what that fixed belief has actually cost you. Every conversation with a family member where you could have said what you meant but did not. Every meeting where a clearer sentence would have moved your career forward but you stayed quiet. Every friendship that stayed on the surface because the depth never made it out of your mouth. Every argument that escalated because you reacted instead of paused. None of those were personality problems. They were skill problems you never treated as such. The mindset this audiobook needs from you is not confidence. It is not motivation. It is not belief in yourself. It is much smaller than that and much more powerful. It is one open question. What if I could get slightly better at this today than I was yesterday? Not dramatically better. Not overnight better. Slightly better. That is the only mindset that produces actual change, because it is the only mindset that survives the awkwardness of the first attempt. You will feel awkward the first time you deliberately pause before speaking. You will feel awkward the first time you ask a genuine open question instead of a polite closed one. You will feel awkward the first time you stop yourself from finishing someone else's sentence. That awkwardness is not a sign that you are bad at this. It is a sign that you are doing something new. The people who become great communicators are not the ones who avoid awkwardness. They are the ones who accept it as the price of the skill. Your task for this chapter is small, but not optional. Write down one specific communication situation where you consistently feel you could do better. Maybe it is a conversation with your partner that always turns into an argument. Maybe it is your relationship with a parent you love but never really talk to. Maybe it is a colleague who makes you feel small every time you interact with them. Maybe it is a first meeting with strangers where you always feel invisible. Pick one, write it down, keep it in mind for the rest of this audiobook. In the final chapter, you will return to it. And what you write today will look different by then, but only if you carry it with you. Communication is not a personality. It is a set of skills, and skills, unlike personalities, are learnable by anyone willing to feel awkward for a few weeks in exchange for a lifetime of better conversations. That is the mindset. That is the door. The handle turns easier than you think. Chapter 2. The person you are about to become through this skill. Something quiet happens when you decide to work on your communication deliberately. Not dramatically, not overnight. Something quiet, and then, over time, something enormous. The people around you begin to lean in a little more when you speak. Conversations that used to end in misunderstanding start ending in understanding. Relationships that used to feel distant start feeling closer. And you, the person doing the work, start walking away from conversations with a feeling that was once rare, the feeling of having actually said what you meant. Most people never experience that feeling consistently. They live inside a low-grade communication frustration that they have accepted as normal. Meetings where they wish they had spoken up. Arguments where they wish they had said the calmer thing. Coffee catch-ups where they wish they had asked one better question. Text messages sent in the wrong tone, taking 3 days to repair. This is the ordinary friction of human life, and most people assume it is unavoidable. It is not. It is just unaddressed. Here is what changes when you address it. Your relationships deepen because the people around you begin to feel genuinely heard rather than merely tolerated. Your influence expands quietly because your ideas begin to land with the clarity they deserve rather than being lost in your delivery. Your confidence grows, not because you become louder, but because you stop leaving rooms with the specific ache of having left something important unsaid. That ache is what most people carry, and most people do not realize how heavy it is until it starts to lift. Communication improvement does not require charisma. That is the first myth to burn. Charisma is a byproduct, not a prerequisite. The people you admire for their communication are not more magnetic than you. They have simply built better internal systems. They pause before responding. They ask before assuming. They listen before speaking. They match their words to their audience. None of that is talent. All of it is architecture. Abraham Lincoln is the clearest example history offers. In his early 20s, Lincoln was described by those who knew him as awkward in manner, overly informal, prone to rambling in conversation, and self-conscious about his own high-pitched voice. He was not a natural. His accent was rural. His posture was ungainly. He had almost no formal schooling. If you had met him in 1832, you would not have predicted eloquence. You would have predicted a hard-working country lawyer with a reasonable career and a limited voice. But Lincoln did something that separated him from every equally awkward young man of his generation. He decided that communication was a skill worth building. He walked miles, literally, to borrow books on rhetoric and grammar. He read them by candlelight after work. He practiced speeches alone in fields and barns, sometimes to trees, sometimes to livestock, because no other audience was available. He studied the speeches of others, not just to admire them, but to understand exactly what made them work. He rewrote his own drafts obsessively, sometimes 15 and 20 times, cutting words, tightening phrases, hunting for the sentence that would carry the meaning most cleanly. By the time he stood on the battlefield at Gettysburg in November 1863, he delivered a speech of 272 words that took him roughly 2 minutes to give. The main speaker that day, Edward Everett, a famous orator considered one of the great communicators of the age, spoke for over 2 hours before him. Ask any American schoolchild today which speech they can still recite. Nobody remembers Everett. Every serious student of English has read Lincoln's opening line, 77 years ago. The awkward country lawyer became the most quoted communicator in American political history, and he did it by treating communication as architecture, one draft, one practice session, one improved sentence at a time. That is available to you, not the presidency, not the historical fame. The underlying process, the willingness to treat communication as a skill worth engineering rather than a trait you were dealt. Peter Drucker, the management thinker whose work shaped modern business communication, wrote something that belongs at the center of this chapter. The most important thing in communication is hearing what is not said. Read that twice, because it names something most people miss. Communication is not primarily about output. It is about perception. It is about noticing the pause in someone's voice, the tightness in a message, the thing they almost said and then swallowed. The person you are about to become through this skill is a person who notices those things, not because you are more sensitive than others, but because you have trained yourself to pay closer attention than you used to. Now think of one person in your life whose communication you genuinely admire. It might be a boss who somehow makes hard conversations feel respectful, a friend who always seems to say the right thing at the right time, a parent who listens in a way that makes you feel completely present, a stranger you met once whose calm way of speaking stayed with you. Pick one person, then ask this question: what specific behavior makes their communication feel so good to be on the receiving end of? It will almost never be their vocabulary. It will rarely be their charisma. It will usually be something structural. They listen without interrupting. They ask questions that go one layer deeper than expected. They pause before answering hard things. They say fewer words than most people would in the same moment. They mean what they say, and their body confirms it. Find one word that describes what they do: calm, present, direct, warm, curious, steady. Whatever word rises for you, write it down. That word is your personal benchmark for this audiobook. It is the direction you are walking. The 7 skills ahead are the road. You are not becoming a different person. You are becoming a more accurate version of the one you already are. The version that says what it means. The version that hears what is not said. The version that walks out of conversations lighter, not heavier. That is the person on the other side of the practice. Chapter 3. Way 1. Listen to understand, not to reply. Most people think listening is the passive part of communication, the part where you wait for your turn to speak. It is the least true assumption in the entire subject. Real listening is the most active and most demanding skill in the whole architecture of communication. It requires your full presence, your genuine curiosity about what the other person actually means, not just what they said, and the discipline to resist forming your response before they have finished speaking. Almost nobody does this consistently, and almost everybody can feel immediately when someone else is doing it for them. Stephen Covey put it in a sentence that has followed his work for 40 years. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Once you hear that sentence, you cannot unhear it, because you will start noticing yourself doing it in every conversation. You are half listening while your brain is already drafting your next sentence. You are waiting for the other person to pause so you can insert your story. You are nodding, but not registering. This is where most people stop, because noticing the habit is uncomfortable, and continuing to notice it is worse. But that discomfort is the entry point to the skill. Here is what the research shows. A 2016 Harvard Business Review study by Zenger and Folkman analyzed data from 3,492 participants in a listening development program. The best listeners, the ones rated highest by those around them, were not the ones who stayed the most silent. They were the ones who asked questions that gently pushed the conversation forward. Their listening was active, not empty. They made the speaker feel like a conversation partner, not an audience member. The worst listeners were not necessarily the ones who interrupted. They were the ones whose presence felt hollow, physically there, mentally absent. That absence is what most people feel from the people around them, and it is what most people give without realizing it. Try this next time. In your very next important conversation, before you respond to anything, pause for 2 seconds, not to think about your answer. Use those 2 seconds to ask yourself one question. Do I fully understand what they just said? If the honest answer is no, ask a clarifying question before you offer anything. If the honest answer is yes, consider asking one more question to go deeper before you shift the conversation toward yourself. That single practice, done consistently, will make the other person feel more listened to than 90% of the people in their life, even if every other element of your communication stays exactly the same. Consider what this looks like in ordinary daily life. A friend calls you and says they are stressed about work. Most people respond in one of 2 ways. Either they say, "I know exactly how you feel," and immediately shift to their own experience, or they jump straight into problem solving. Have you tried talking to your manager? Have you thought about looking for a new job? Have you considered a break? Both responses feel helpful from the inside. Both feel dismissive from the outside, because both skip the step the friend actually needed, being heard first. Now imagine a different response. Your friend says they are stressed about work. You pause. You ask, "What kind of stress is it?" Your friend, slightly surprised by the question, actually thinks about it for a second. They say, "Honestly, it is not the work itself. It is that my manager keeps promising a promotion that never comes." You pause again. You ask, "How long has that been going on?" They tell you. You ask, "How are you feeling about it now, 3 months in?" They tell you more. By the time you offer any advice, if you offer any at all, Your friend feels something they rarely feel in that kind of conversation. Fully met, not fixed, not one-upped, not lectured, met. That is the entire skill in miniature, and it takes almost no talent. It takes attention. There are a few things to actively do here, and a few things to actively stop doing. Do make eye contact while the other person speaks. Not the intense, unblinking stare that makes people uncomfortable. Steady, natural engagement that signals your full attention. Do put your phone face down or out of sight in any conversation that matters. The presence of a phone on the table, even face down, has been shown in multiple studies to reduce the perceived quality of a conversation. Do take one breath after the other person finishes before responding. Do ask at least one follow-up question before offering your own view. Now the do nots. Do not form your response while the other person is still speaking. Your face gives it away, and they can feel it. Do not interrupt. Do not finish their sentences. Do not redirect the conversation to your own experience before they have felt heard. Do not check your phone or glance at other things when someone is sharing something important. Every one of those behaviors, small as they seem, tells the other person that this conversation is not the priority for you, even when you do not mean it that way. The truth is, most people go through life starving for genuine attention. Their partners half listen because they are tired. Their colleagues half listen because they are busy. Their friends half listen because they are distracted. When someone finally listens, fully, without agenda, without a rush to respond, the effect is almost startling. People will tell you things they have never told anyone, not because you did anything magical, because you simply stayed present when everyone else was thinking about their next line. I learnt this the hard way. In my corporate years, I thought I was a good listener because I was quiet in meetings. Quiet is not the same as listening. Quiet can be planning your rebuttal. Quiet can be judging. Quiet can be waiting. Real listening is a specific kind of attention, and it can only be practiced, never faked. Your task for this chapter is simple. Today, have one conversation where your only goal is to ask 2 genuine questions before you share your own opinion or experience on the topic. Count them, 2 minimum. Notice how the person responds to you afterward. Notice how the conversation feels different from the ones you usually have. That small experiment will teach you more about communication than 100 books can. Chapter 4. Way 2. Use the pause before you speak. There is a 2-second window in every conversation that decides whether your next sentence works or fails. Most people never notice it, because most people fill it immediately with the first words that arrive in their mouth. That 2-second window is the pause, and the pause is the single most underused tool in human communication. Embrace. A deliberate moment of silence before responding is not a sign of uncertainty, it is a sign of control. It communicates that you are choosing your words intentionally rather than reacting automatically. People who speak thoughtfully after a brief pause are consistently perceived as more intelligent, more confident, and more trustworthy than those who rush to fill every silence with the first thing that comes to mind. That is not personal opinion. That has been demonstrated across decades of behavioral research on judgment, testimony, and negotiation. Amy Cuddy, a social psychologist at Harvard, has spent much of her career studying how people are perceived in the first seconds of interaction. Her work, along with that of many others in social judgment research, consistently arrives at the same conclusion. Warmth and competence are the 2 dimensions on which humans instinctively judge one another. And of the 2, warmth is judged first, competence is judged second. The pause serves both. A person who pauses briefly before answering signals that they took the question seriously, which reads as warmth, and they signal that they are considering their response with care, which reads as competence. 2/3 of a second of silence can do more for how you are perceived than an hour of practiced speech. But here is the counterintuitive part. Most people are afraid of the pause. They treat silence like an emergency. If nobody is talking, something has gone wrong. Fill it. Fill it with anything. An a like, a you know, a hurried opinion, an unnecessary agreement, a joke. The result is that most people speak faster than they think, and the gap between what they meant to say and what they actually said grows a little wider with every rushed sentence. The truth is, silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is communication. It says, I am considering what you said. It says, this deserves more than a reflexive answer. It says, I am here fully, not partly. Thomas Carlyle wrote that speech is silver, but silence is golden. That was not decorative language. It was a description of a real communication economy. The more thoughtfully you use silence, the more your speech is worth when it arrives. Try the 2-second rule for a week. Every time someone finishes speaking to you, count silently to 2 before you respond. It will feel uncomfortable at first, because most of us have been conditioned to treat any silence longer than 1 second as socially awkward. But watch what happens in those 2 seconds. Your brain finishes processing what the other person actually said. Your response becomes more relevant to their actual question, rather than to the question you assumed they were asking. Your emotional temperature may settle if what they said touched something in you, and the person almost never notices the pause as awkward. What they notice at the end of the conversation is that talking to you felt different somehow, more considered, more real. The pause matters even more in high-stakes conversations. In salary negotiations, professional negotiators are trained to sit with silence after making an offer. Amateurs feel the pressure of the silence and start softening their own position before the other party has said a word. Silence is uncomfortable, and the person who can tolerate that discomfort longest usually wins the negotiation. This is true in personal conversations too. Someone shares something vulnerable. You pause. They fill the pause with more depth, more truth, more of what they actually meant. If you had rushed to reassure them or advise them, they would have stopped there. Your silence gave them permission to go further. Here are the practical rules of the pause. Do take a brief pause after someone asks you a question before answering, especially in professional or emotionally important conversations. Do use a longer pause, 3 to 5 seconds, before responding to anything that touched an emotion in you. That extra time is the difference between a reaction and a response, and the difference between a repaired conversation and a damaged one. Do let silence sit after you deliver an important point. Do not rush to explain it, restate it, or apologize for it. Let it land. The weight of a point is often carried by the silence after it, not the words inside it. Now the do nots. Do not fill pauses with like, or you know. These filler words make you sound less confident than silence would. Every filler word is a small crack in the perception of authority you are trying to build. Do not rush to respond in emotional conversations. The faster you respond when emotions are high, the more likely your response will be something you regret by morning. If you feel your chest tighten, if you feel your face heat, if you feel the urge to defend, pause for 5 full seconds before you speak. Every therapist, every skilled negotiator, every seasoned parent has learnt this the same way. The reactive sentence is almost never the right sentence. Consider a real, ordinary example. A partner tells you at dinner that something you did earlier in the week hurt them. Most people do one of 2 things. They immediately defend themselves. That is not what I meant. You are misreading it. Or they immediately apologize without understanding what they are apologizing for, just to end the tension. Both responses damage the conversation, one by escalation, the other by dismissal. Now imagine a 5-second pause. In those 5 seconds, you take a breath. You notice your own defensive urge. You let it pass. Then you respond. Tell me more about what specifically bothered you. That sentence, said after a pause, has a completely different weight than any reactive response. It communicates that you took them seriously enough to think before speaking. That single skill, practiced consistently, will change the emotional texture of every important relationship in your life. Your task for this chapter is small. In one conversation today, deliberately pause for 2 full seconds before every response. Not 1, 2. At the end of the conversation, notice whether your answers felt more thoughtful than usual. Notice whether the other person seemed more attentive when you spoke. That small experiment is the entire lesson of this chapter in miniature. Chapter 5. Way 3. Speak simply and say exactly what you mean. Clarity is kindness. Read that sentence again, because most people have the entire relationship backward. They think complicated language sounds smart. They think long sentences sound thoughtful. They think impressive vocabulary earns respect. It does not. It builds walls. When you speak in complicated language, you are asking the other person to work hard to find your meaning. When you speak in simple, direct language, you are handing them your meaning without asking them to lift anything. That is what clarity actually is. A gift, given for free, that most people are too self-conscious to offer. The truth is, great communicators are not the ones with the most impressive vocabularies. They are the ones who can take a complex idea and express it so simply that everyone in the room, from the executive to the intern, walks away with the same understanding. Simplicity is not a limitation of thought. It is the highest expression of it. Because in order to say something simply, you must first understand it deeply. If you cannot explain it simply, wrote a phrase often attributed to Albert Einstein, you do not understand it well enough. Whether Einstein said it exactly that way or not, the principle stands. Confusion in your language is almost always confusion in your thinking. Warren Buffett, the investor who built Berkshire Hathaway into one of the most valuable companies in the world, is famous for writing annual shareholder letters that a 14-year-old could understand. He deliberately avoids financial jargon. He uses everyday analogies. He compares complex investment concepts to baseball, to farming, to buying a house. Analysts have studied his letters for decades, trying to figure out what makes them so effective. The answer is not clever, it is disciplined. Buffett writes as if he is explaining ideas to his sisters at the kitchen table, and he has publicly said this is his exact intention. The result is that his letters are quoted, studied, and remembered in a way that dense, technical financial writing never is. Simplicity wins, every time. Here is the practical version of this skill. Before any important conversation or presentation, ask yourself one question. What is the single most important thing I want this person to understand? Write it down in one sentence of 20 words or fewer. That sentence is your core message. Everything else you say in that conversation should support, explain, or lead back to that one sentence. If what you are about to say does not connect to your core message, ask yourself honestly whether it needs to be said at all. Most sentences most people speak, in most conversations, do not need to be said. They are filler, padding, verbal throat clearing. Cut them, and your communication doubles in impact. There are a few disciplines that make this practical. Do use short sentences. Communication research consistently suggests that sentences of 15 words or fewer are most easily retained by listeners. Do replace complex words with everyday ones whenever possible. Use instead of utilize, ask instead of inquire, show instead of demonstrate, buy instead of purchase, help instead of facilitate. Nothing is lost by the simpler word. Something is often gained. Do use analogies to explain complicated ideas. When something is unfamiliar, connect it to something familiar. A budget is like a diet. A relationship is like a bank account. A career is like a garden. Analogies do not simplify the idea. They give the listener a shortcut into it. Now the do nots. Do not use jargon with people outside your field. Every profession has its own dialect, and that dialect is invisible to people who speak it every day. If you work in finance, law, medicine, or tech, you have a vocabulary you use without thinking that means nothing to your neighbor. Translate it. Do not over-explain a point that has already been received. When someone nods and says, "Yes, I understand," trust them. Adding a third and a fourth explanation of the same point signals a lack of confidence in what you already said and makes the listener feel talked down to. Do not add qualifiers and hedges that dilute your message. "I was kind of thinking it might be worth considering." Everything before the actual point is verbal fog. Just say what you mean. Consider a real, everyday example. You are telling a neighbor about a problem at work. One version sounds like this: "The organizational restructuring initiative has created operational inefficiencies that are affecting our deliverable timelines and require stakeholder alignment before we can proceed." Read that out loud. Notice what you feel. Now the simpler version: "My team is confused about the new structure, and we need a meeting to sort out who does what." Both sentences describe the same situation, but only one of them actually communicates it. The neighbor immediately understands the second version. The first version leaves them uncertain whether to nod or ask for a translation. Simplicity wins, every single time. This principle scales. In relationships, complicated language is often used to soften truths that should be spoken plainly. "I have been thinking a lot about the overall direction of our situation and where we might need to make adjustments." That sentence is verbal cowardice dressed up as diplomacy. The plain version: "I am unhappy and we need to talk." It is harder to say, but it is the sentence the relationship actually needs. In work, complicated language is often used to avoid commitment. We will look into it, evaluate our options, and circle back at an appropriate juncture. The plain version: "I will get back to you Thursday." Notice which one you actually trust. I have seen this destroy careers. People who could have led entire departments got passed over because they hid inside language that impressed nobody. And I have seen quiet, plain-speaking people rise past louder colleagues because their sentences were understood on the first pass. Not theory, lived experience. Your task for this chapter is direct. Before your next important conversation or message, write your main point in one sentence of 20 words or fewer. Then have the conversation using that sentence as your anchor. Every time you feel yourself drifting into complication, come back to the anchor. Notice whether the conversation feels more focused than usual. It will. Simplicity is a discipline. Discipline is the entire game. Chapter 6. Way 4. Let your body say the same thing your words say. Every conversation is really two conversations happening at the same time. The verbal one, made of words, and the non-verbal one, made of posture, eye contact, facial expression, tone of voice, and the space between you and the other person. Most people think the verbal conversation is the main one. It is not. When the two conflict, humans instinctively trust the non-verbal channel. You can say you are listening while your eyes flick to your phone, and the other person will not feel heard, regardless of your words. The words become noise. The body becomes truth. Albert Mirabian, a UCLA researcher, published a set of studies in 1967 that became widely quoted and widely misquoted on this subject. The specific numbers he found: that 7% of a message is verbal, 38% is tone of voice, and 55% is body language, applied only to conversations about feelings and attitudes, not to all communication. But the underlying principle has held up across 60 years of subsequent research. When words and body disagree, people believe the body. Not sometimes, every time. Your posture, your eye contact, and your facial expression are not decoration around your words. They are half of what you are actually communicating, whether you intend to or not. Here is what this means practically. You may have excellent verbal skills. You may listen well. You may pause before speaking. You may choose simple, clear words. And still, if your body says something different, your communication will collapse. Arms crossed while you say you are open to feedback. Keep your eyes on your screen while you say the conversation is important. A flat expression while you say you are excited. Every one of those mismatches is a small betrayal that the listener registers instantly, even if they cannot name it. They walk away feeling that something was off. They rarely know exactly what, but they know. Aligning what your body communicates with what your words are saying is not performance. It is the completion of the communication your words began. Your task is not to fake warmth you do not feel. Your task is to let the warmth you do feel actually reach your face, to let the interest you have actually reach your posture, to let the attention you are giving actually reach your eyes. Most people are more engaged internally than they appear externally, and that gap is what most communication struggles are actually made of. Choose one non-verbal behavior to practice for a full week. Just one. If eye contact is difficult for you, practice holding it for the duration of each sentence the other person speaks. Not longer, not shorter, one sentence at a time. If your arms tend to cross when you feel challenged, notice the moment they cross and consciously uncross them before responding. If you tend to look distracted when thinking, practice pausing with your eyes on the person rather than looking away as you gather your thoughts. One change, practiced consistently for a week, produces more improvement in how you are received than trying to fix everything at once. Everything at once produces nothing at all. There are practical guidelines here. Do maintain natural eye contact approximately 70% of the time when listening and 60% when speaking. Not staring, not scanning the room. Steady, natural engagement. Do let your face respond naturally to what is being said. A slight nod when you agree. A small lean forward when something is interesting. A soft breath out when something is heavy. Faces that respond feel present. Faces that stay flat feel absent, even when the person is fully engaged internally. Do keep your posture open. Sit or stand upright, with your arms relaxed at your sides, or resting naturally, not crossed defensively across your chest. Open posture communicates openness. That is not a metaphor. That is how it reads on the receiving end. Now the do nots. Do not stare without blinking, or look away frequently. Both extremes signal discomfort or disengagement, and both are read the same way. Do not use gestures that are much larger or more animated than the situation calls for. Oversized gestures can feel performative rather than genuine. The best physical communication is proportionate to the emotional content of the conversation. Small point, small gestures. Big point, slightly bigger. Do not smile constantly without variation. A fixed smile signals performance, not presence. Your face should be free to respond to what is actually being said, not locked into an expression you think is polite. Consider tone of voice, which is often forgotten in the body language conversation, but belongs squarely inside it. The same sentence, delivered in 3 different tones, communicates 3 entirely different messages. Take the simple words, "We need to talk," said warmly, with a slight lift at the end. It sounds like an invitation. Said flatly, with no expression, it sounds like a warning. Said sharply, with weight on the word need, it sounds like a threat. The words are identical. The communication is not. Your tone is doing 80% of the actual work in that sentence, and most people never consciously choose it. Consider physical distance. Standing too close makes people feel crowded, even if your words are gentle. Standing too far makes people feel dismissed, even if your words are warm. Match the physical distance to the emotional distance of the relationship, and the conversation flows more easily. This is not a rule that requires thinking about in the middle of a conversation. It is a rule that requires awareness only once, so your body adjusts the next time naturally. Peter Drucker's line belongs here too. The most important thing in communication is hearing what is not said. That works in both directions. You must learn to hear what other people are not saying with their bodies, and you must learn to notice what you are not saying with yours. Both channels carry information. Both channels are constantly on. I learnt this the hard way, and I want to name it clearly, because most people underestimate how far this reaches. In my corporate years, I gave a presentation to a board where every word I said was exactly right, and none of it landed. I had rehearsed the words. I had not rehearsed my body. My arms stayed rigid at my sides. My face gave nothing away. My voice stayed at one flat register. The words were correct. The delivery was dead. Afterward, one of the older board members took me aside and said the sentence that stayed with me for years. Your words told us what to think. Your body told us not to bother. That is the exact price of the mismatch. Your task for this chapter is small. In one conversation today, pay attention only to your own body language for the first 60 seconds. Notice your posture. Notice where your eyes go. Notice what your face is doing while the other person speaks. Adjust one thing that does not match what you are trying to communicate. Uncross your arms. Soften your face. Turn your torso toward them instead of angling away. Notice whether the other person responds differently. They almost always will. Chapter 7. Way 5. Ask better questions and watch conversations transform. Questions are the most powerful tool in communication, and most people use them at the most basic level. They ask questions that invite yes or no answers, and then they wonder why the conversation feels flat. They ask questions that seem curious, but are really disguised statements, and then they wonder why the other person seems guarded. They ask no questions at all in conversations that were begging for one, and then they wonder why the connection never got past the surface. The truth is, the quality of your questions determines the quality of your conversations. Almost nothing else matters as much. There are two kinds of questions. Closed questions invite a yes or no answer. Did you have a good day? Was the meeting useful? Are you tired? These questions have their place, but their place is small. Open questions invite the other person to think, to share, to go deeper. What was the most useful part of the meeting? What is weighing on you most right now? What part of your work feels most meaningful to you these days? Open questions do something that closed questions almost never do. They give the other person the experience of being explored rather than interrogated, and people who feel genuinely explored in a conversation almost always leave it feeling warm toward the person who did the exploring. Alison Wood Brooks, a professor at Harvard Business School, has spent years studying the science of asking questions. Her research, along with the work of Karen Hung and others, has consistently found something that surprises people. In conversations between strangers, the person who asked more follow-up questions was rated as significantly more likable by the other party, not the person who was funnier, not the person who talked more, not the person who shared more about themselves. The person who asked more follow-up questions. That single behavior, asking one more question that goes one layer deeper than expected, produced measurable increases in how much the other person enjoyed the conversation and how much they wanted to talk again. The reason is simple. Being asked a genuine question is one of the rarest experiences in adult life. Most conversations are transactions. How are you? Fine. How about you? Fine. Everyone stays polite. Nobody goes anywhere. When somebody breaks that pattern with a real question, it lands differently. You feel it. You lean in. You give a real answer instead of the automatic one. That single genuine question can turn a stalled conversation into a real one in a single sentence. Start replacing closed questions with open ones in every conversation this week. Instead of asking, "Did you enjoy the meeting?" ask, "What was the most useful part of the meeting for you?" Instead of asking, "Are you stressed?" ask, "What is weighing on you most right now?" Instead of asking, "Do you like your work?" ask, "What part of your work feels most meaningful to you?" Notice how differently these conversations feel. The other person almost always has more to say than a yes or no could hold, and what they share is almost always more interesting than what a closed question would have surfaced. There are working rules for this. Do start questions with what, how, tell me about, or describe when you want deeper answers. These openings signal that a longer response is welcome. Do use follow-up questions that go one layer deeper. When someone says work has been stressful, do not move on to a new topic. Ask what, specifically, has been stressful. When they answer, ask, "How are you carrying that?" That is one layer deeper than the first question, and it is where the real conversation begins. Do let your genuine curiosity drive the questions. The best questions come from actually wanting to know the answer, not from a script of questions you thought you should ask. Now the do nots. Do not ask multiple questions at once. If you ask, "How was the trip and what did you eat? And did you like the hotel and would you go back?" the other person can only answer one and usually chooses the shallowest. Pick one and wait for the answer. Do not ask leading questions that suggest the answer you want. "So you agree that was a great decision, right?" is not a question. It is a request for agreement, dressed up as one. Do not ask questions that feel like interrogations. If your questions feel like a checklist, the conversation will feel like an interview, and the other person will start giving interview answers, which are always shallower than genuine ones. Consider a real everyday example. Two people meet a colleague at a work event. Person A asks, "What do you do?" The colleague says their job title. Both parties feel the conversation stall. Person A moves on to the weather. That is where most work conversations end. Now consider person B, who has spent 5 minutes practicing this skill. Person B asks the same colleague what part of their work keeps them most engaged right now. The colleague pauses, slightly surprised by the question. Then they light up. They start telling person B about a specific project they care about. Person B listens fully, then asks, "What has been the hardest part of that project for you?" Now they are talking about something real. 20 minutes later, they are still talking, and each has asked the other more genuine questions in 20 minutes than either has been asked at a work event in years. Person B did not have better social skills. Person B asked a better question. That is the entire difference. This works with strangers, and it works even more powerfully with people you already know. Your partner, your parents, your closest friends. Most long-term relationships lose depth over time, not because the love faded, but because the questions stopped. You stopped asking. They stopped asking. Everyone assumed they already knew the answers. Try this experiment sometime. Ask your partner or your closest friend a question you have never asked them before. What is something you have been thinking about lately that you have not told anyone? Watch what happens. Most people, given a real question, will tell you something real. The quality of your questions determines the quality of your conversations, not your looks, not your charisma, not your vocabulary, your questions. And questions are entirely learnable. You can decide, in the next 30 seconds, to become a person who asks slightly better questions than you did yesterday. That decision compounds over the years into a life full of deeper conversations, closer relationships, and richer insights into the people you spend your time with. Your task for this chapter is direct. In your next 3 conversations today, replace one closed question with an open one in each. Write down the open question you used in each conversation, At the end of the day, review whether those conversations went deeper than the ones you normally have. They will, and once you see it, the habit builds itself. Chapter 8. Way 6. Adapt how you speak to whom you are speaking. The most effective communicators in the world are not the ones who speak the same way in every situation. They are the ones who can read who they are speaking to and adjust their language, tone, pace, and level of formality accordingly. This is not manipulation. It is not inauthenticity. It is the same as adjusting your walking speed to keep pace with someone who moves differently from you. You are still you. You are simply making it easier to move together. When your communication style fits the person you are speaking with, they stop focusing on how you communicate and start fully engaging with what you say. That is the entire purpose of adaptation. To remove the friction between your intent and their understanding. Most people underestimate how much of their communication style is a habit they developed decades ago and have never questioned. You speak to your manager the same way you do to your teenager. Same pace, same word choices, same tone. And then you wonder why one of them tunes out and the other one snaps at you. It is not because you are a bad communicator. It is because you are using a one-size-fits-all approach in a world that is not one-size-fits-all. Tony Robbins put this bluntly. You do not communicate to others the way you want to be communicated to. You communicate to others the way they need to be communicated to. That sentence contains the whole skill, because most people, by default, communicate outward from their own preferences. If you like detail, you give detail. If you like efficiency, you deliver efficiency. If you like warmth first, you lead with warmth. The problem is that not everyone you speak to shares your preferences. When your default matches theirs, communication feels effortless. When it does not, communication feels like friction, and neither of you understands why. Consider a real, everyday example. A teacher explaining photosynthesis to a 10-year-old and to a university professor uses entirely different language for the same idea. To the child, they might say, "Plants eat sunlight the way you eat sandwiches, and they turn that sunlight into food inside their leaves." To the professor, they would say, "Plants use chlorophyll to convert light energy into chemical energy stored in glucose molecules through a specific set of enzymatic reactions." Same concept, two entirely different communications. The teacher who cannot move between these two audiences is not a bad person. They are simply a less skilled communicator than one who can. And the same is true for you every single day as you speak with different kinds of people, different ages, different backgrounds, different roles, different concerns. Before any significant conversation, take 30 seconds to ask yourself 2 questions about the person you are about to speak with. First question: what do they care most about in relation to what I want to discuss? Second question: how do they prefer to receive information, through detail or through big picture overview? The answers to those 2 questions will completely shape whether you lead with data, with story, with efficiency, or with warmth. Matching your opening to what the other person values most dramatically increases the likelihood that they will engage with what you say next. Most communication failures are not failures of content, they are failures of opening. You lost them in the first 10 seconds by leading with the wrong thing. Steve Jobs, whatever else you may think of him, was legendary for this at Apple. He would deliberately shift his communication style depending on which audience he was addressing. To engineers, he was technical, direct, and demanding. To designers, he was aesthetic, poetic, and detailed about feeling. To investors, he was concise, numeric, and outcome-focused. To customers, he was clear, simple, and emotionally connected. He was not being 4 different people. He was being one person who understood that a great communicator adjusts the delivery mechanism without changing the underlying truth. Every product launch he gave was engineered for the audience in the room, And that is a large part of why those product launches are still studied in business schools 20 years later. There are practical guidelines. Do mirror the pace of speech of the person you are talking to. If they speak slowly and thoughtfully, slow down. If they are energetic and fast, match their energy without losing your own thoughtfulness. Mirroring pace is one of the fastest ways to help another person feel comfortable with you. Do notice whether someone responds better to facts or to feelings, and adjust which you lead with. If your manager wants the numbers first, give the numbers first, then the story. If your teenager wants to feel understood first, listen first, then offer information. Do use the vocabulary level of the person you are speaking to. Do not talk down. Do not talk up. Speak at the register that fits them. Now the do nots. Do not adapt so completely that you lose your own authentic voice. The goal is to adjust how you deliver your genuine self, not to pretend to be someone else. There is a difference between adjusting pace and abandoning identity. Adaptation is the first. Chameleon behavior is the second, and it eventually reads as untrustworthy. Do not assume the same communication style works with your manager, your teenager, and your closest friend. It rarely does. Each of those relationships lives inside a slightly different code, and the communicator who ignores those codes will pay a small daily tax on every conversation. Notice this in your own life. Think about the person in your world with whom you communicate most easily. What are you doing in those conversations without thinking about it? You are probably matching their pace, using their kind of language, prioritizing what they prioritize. That is adaptation happening naturally. Now think about the person in your world with whom communication feels hardest. You are probably not doing any of that. You are showing up in your own default mode, and they are showing up in theirs, and the two modes are colliding. Adaptation, done consciously, is what dissolves that friction. I have seen this destroy people in professional settings. Brilliant, technical minds who could not adjust their communication for non-technical audiences got stuck in mid-level roles for entire careers, while less brilliant people who could adjust rose past them into leadership. The technical minds were not less competent, they were less adaptive. And in the long run, the adaptability of communication determines whether your intelligence actually reaches other people or dies inside your own head. This is where most people stop. They believe adapting means selling out. They believe consistency means integrity. Neither is true. Consistency in your values is integrity. Consistency in your communication delivery is stubbornness dressed up as principle. The values do not change from one conversation to the next. The delivery must. Your task for this chapter is direct. Choose two people in your life who have very different communication styles. Before your next conversation with each person, think for 30 seconds about how they prefer to receive information. Then, adapt your opening to match that preference. With one, lead with detail. With the other, lead with story. With one, use short, crisp sentences. With the other, use warmer, flowing ones. Notice whether the conversations flow more easily than usual. They will, because you finally met each person where they were, instead of asking both to meet you where you were. Chapter 9. Way 7. Give and receive feedback that builds rather than breaks. Feedback is the most frequently mishandled moment in both professional and personal communication. Giving feedback that was meant to help but comes across as criticism is one of the most common ways relationships and team dynamics quietly deteriorate. Receiving feedback that was offered helpfully but triggered defensiveness is equally damaging. Most people are bad at both sides of this transaction, and most people know they are bad at it. And most people never address it because feedback is uncomfortable to think about in the abstract. But learning to both give and receive feedback in ways that strengthen rather than damage the relationship is a communication skill that changes the quality of every ongoing relationship you have. Not eventually, immediately. Here is the reality of feedback. Every human brain is wired to interpret criticism as a threat. This is not weakness. This is neurology. Research from Matthew Lieberman at UCLA and others in the field of social cognitive neuroscience has consistently shown that social pain, including the pain of being criticized, activates the same brain regions as physical pain. When someone hears feedback that lands as criticism, their body responds as it would to a physical attack. Cortisol rises, defenses go up, logical thinking narrows. This is happening whether or not the person outwardly reacts. And this is why so many feedback conversations, even well-intentioned ones, escalate into arguments or fall silent. You are not talking to a rational listener when you deliver feedback poorly. You are talking to a nervous system that has decided you are dangerous, which means the how of feedback matters as much as the what, maybe more. Feedback meticum. Here is a structure that works. When giving feedback, use the connection structure. Start by acknowledging something genuine and specific that is working, not empty flattery, a real observed strength. Then name the specific behavior that needs to change, not the person, but the behavior, and explain its specific impact. Then close with your genuine confidence in their ability to improve it. This structure ensures that the person receiving the feedback feels respected before, during, and after the correction. They can hear the middle piece because the two ends held them steady. An example. A poor version of feedback sounds like this: "You need to communicate better in meetings." That sentence contains no useful information, no acknowledgement, and no path forward. The person cannot act on it. They only feel judged. The better version. When you presented on Tuesday, the way you structured the opening was clear and got the room's attention. Where I think you lost some of us was in the middle section, where the data started to overlap. If you could tighten that middle section by cutting 1 or 2 slides, I think the next presentation will land completely, because you already have the front and back end of it strong. Notice what happened. Same feedback, entirely different reception. The person can now act, and they walked away feeling coached, not attacked. When receiving feedback, use a different structure. Before responding, say, "Thank you for telling me this," not to be polite. To buy yourself the 2 seconds you need before your defenses fire. Then ask one clarifying question. Can you give me a specific example? That question does 2 things. It keeps you out of immediate defensiveness, and it gives you something concrete to work with, rather than a vague piece of criticism that is impossible to act on. If the person cannot give a specific example, their feedback was probably a projection or a bad day, and you can safely set it aside. If they can, you now have something real to consider. There are practical rules. Do give feedback on specific behaviors and specific moments, not on personality or character. "You interrupted 3 times in that meeting" is workable. "You are always interrupting people" is a character judgment, and it will trigger defensiveness regardless of how gently you say it. Do time your feedback thoughtfully. The moment of highest emotion is almost never the best moment for feedback. Wait until the temperature drops. Do ask for feedback from others regularly. Research on professional development consistently shows that people who actively solicit feedback improve their skills significantly faster than those who wait passively for it. Feedback you invited is easier to hear than feedback that arrived unrequested. Now the do nots. Do not begin feedback with "but." Everything before the word "but" is discounted by the listener's brain the moment the word arrives. "I really appreciate your work on this, but I heard it as, none of what came before this word was real." Replace "but" with "and" wherever possible. I really appreciate your work on this, and I have one specific piece I would like to strengthen. Same content, different landing. Do not give general feedback. You need to communicate better, be more confident, and be a better listener. None of these are actionable. General feedback is worse than no feedback, because it makes the receiver feel diminished without giving them anything to work with. Do not take feedback personally unless the person offering it has established trust and good intentions. Feedback from people who do not know you or do not care about you is data, not truth. Consider it, weigh it, discard what does not fit, keep what does. The truth is, the ability to receive feedback well is one of the highest correlates of long-term professional and personal growth. Research by Jack Zenger and Joseph Folkman, published in Harvard Business Review, found that leaders who actively sought and welcomed negative feedback were rated in the top 10% for leadership effectiveness. Leaders who avoided or reacted defensively to feedback were rated in the bottom 10%. Same intelligence, same technical skills. The differentiator was almost entirely how they received input. This applies far beyond leadership. In marriages, in friendships, in parenting, the person who can hear feedback without collapsing or attacking is the person around whom trust builds fastest, because everyone else can now be honest with them. I learnt this the hard way. In my early corporate years, I gave feedback like a hammer and received it like an insult. Both sides of that pattern cost me relationships I only later realized I could have kept. I rebuilt the skills slowly, in my mid-30s, by studying people who did it well and imitating their exact language. Connection, correction, connection when giving. Thank you, specific example. Quiet consideration when receiving. It felt mechanical at first. It became natural, and when it became natural, the trust in every serious relationship around me deepened in a way I had not thought possible. Your task for this chapter is direct. Give one piece of specific positive feedback to someone today, not a general compliment, a specific observation. The way you explained that in the meeting made it very clear for everyone. Or, the sentence you used when you were talking to your father last night was exactly right, and I saw him relax when you said it. Something specific enough that the person knows you were actually paying attention. Notice how differently the person responds to specific feedback compared to general praise. That contrast is the whole lesson of this chapter in one small experiment. Chapter 10. Now use it. The daily habit that turns learning into living. You have now heard 7 ways to improve your communication. Listening with full attention. Using the pause before you speak. Speaking simply and saying exactly what you mean. Aligning your body with your words. Asking better questions. Adapting your style to the person in front of you. Giving and receiving feedback in ways that build rather than break. 7 skills, each one learnable, each one immediately practical, each one capable of changing the quality of your conversations starting today. But here is the truth. This audiobook would be dishonest not to say. You will not improve by hearing these 7 ways. You will improve by practicing one of them in the very next conversation you have after this audiobook ends, then practicing another one in the conversation after that. Then another, then another. The knowledge lives in the chapters, the skill lives in the practice, and practice, unlike learning, does not happen inside your head. It happens inside real conversations, with real people, on ordinary days. Now think back. In the first chapter, you were asked to write down one specific communication situation where you consistently feel you could do better. Return to it now. Look at it. Maybe it is a conversation with your partner that always turns tense. Maybe it is a relationship with a parent that never went deep. Maybe it is a work dynamic where you always feel unheard. Maybe it is the discomfort you feel meeting new people at events. Whatever it is, Hold it in your mind now. Imagine that same situation 3 months from today, not perfectly resolved, not effortless, but different. Because for 3 months you have practiced one skill at a time in ordinary daily conversations. You have paused before responding. You have asked one more question than you used to. You have watched your body match your words. You have adapted to who you are speaking to. 3 months of small daily deposits into the same account. What does that situation feel like on the other side of that practice? What does it look like a year from now? Because a year is not far away. A year passes whether you use it or not. The only question is whether you use it. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years imprisoned on Robben Island. 27 years, most of them in a cell smaller than most people's bathrooms. When he was released in February 1990, the world expected a man broken by that experience, or a man consumed by rage at those who had imprisoned him. What emerged was neither. What emerged was a communicator so precise, so patient, and so grounded that he could guide an entire nation through a transition that most political analysts had predicted would end in civil war. Here is what most people do not know. During those 27 years, Mandela had studied the language of his captors. He had learned Afrikaans. He had read Afrikaner poetry and history. He had practiced listening to people he disagreed with, deeply and completely, until he could understand their fears from the inside. He had developed the ability to speak in ways that made even his opponents feel respected and heard. When he became president of South Africa in 1994, he used communication not as a weapon, but as a bridge. He would later say, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, it goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart." 27 years of imprisonment did not break his ability to connect with other human beings. 27 years of imprisonment deepened it. Because he practiced every single day, even inside 4 walls, even with the smallest available audience. You have more freedom than Mandela had for most of those years. You have more people to practice with than he did. And you have the framework of 7 specific skills to practice, which he had to assemble on his own from books smuggled into his cell. What you build with your communication skills from today forward is entirely up to you. There is no external cage on this. There is only the internal question of whether you actually practice. George Bernard Shaw wrote a line that belongs at the heart of this final chapter. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Read that twice. Because most people go through their lives assuming they have communicated when they have not. They said the words. The other person nodded. Nothing landed. Both parties walked away carrying different understandings of the same conversation. That illusion is the reason relationships fray. It is the reason careers stall. It is the reason marriages quietly grow lonely in the same house. Communication only actually takes place when the meaning arrives, not when the words were said, only when the meaning arrived. Jim Rohn wrote a line worth carrying with you. Take advantage of every opportunity to practice your communication skills so that when important occasions arise, you will have the gift, the style, the sharpness, the clarity, and the emotional range to influence others. Notice the phrasing, every opportunity, not the important ones, all of them. The checkout line, the elevator, the dinner table, the team meeting, the text message. Each one is a repetition, and repetitions compound. Here is the daily habit that turns these 7 skills from information into identity. In the morning, take 2 minutes. Choose one of the 7 skills as your focus skill for the day. Just one, not all 7. Write it on a note. Put it somewhere you will see it before your first conversation of the day. This is your practice target for the next 12 hours. During the day, practice your focus skill in every significant conversation. Do not try to do all 7, just the one you chose. If it is listening, listen better. If it is pausing, pause pause more. If it is asking questions, ask them. Keep the focus narrow. Depth beats spread. In the evening, take 2 minutes. Think of one conversation from the day. Did you practice your focus skill? What worked? What would you do differently next time? No self-criticism, no guilt, just observation. Observation is how skill builds. Cycle through all 7 skills over 7 days. In the second week, repeat the cycle. In the third week, notice which skill has improved most naturally and which one still needs deliberate attention. Return to the one that still needs work. This 4-minute per day routine, morning focus and evening review, is the entire operating system. Simple enough that you will actually do it. Structured enough to actually work. The truth is, everything you become in your relationships, in your career, and in the quiet quality of your daily life is built from conversations, thousands of them, small ones and large ones, ordinary Tuesdays and once-in-a-lifetime moments. The person who deliberately improves the quality of each conversation, one skill at a time, one day at a time, becomes, over the years, a person whose relationships run deeper, whose work lands cleaner, and whose presence in a room shifts something in the people around them, not through charisma, through architecture. Your final task is small. Before you go to sleep tonight, set a reminder for tomorrow morning that says, choose one communication skill to practice today. Then, tomorrow, do it. One reminder, one skill, one day. Then repeat. That is where transformation begins. Not in this audiobook, not in what you understood while listening, in the very next conversation you have after this recording ends. You have now heard 7 ways to improve your communication. You have also heard the mindset that has to come first, and the daily habit that has to come last. That is the entire architecture. Nothing was hidden, nothing was withheld. Everything you need is now in your hands. The question is not whether you understood it. You did. The question is what happens tomorrow morning when you wake up. Because tomorrow morning is where this audiobook actually begins. Not now, while you are still listening. Then, when the recording is silent, and the only voice left is your own. Most people who listen to something like this feel a small surge of motivation. They feel like they will finally change something. That surge lasts about 24 hours. Then life resumes. The old conversations resume. The old patterns resume, and the audiobook joins the long shelf of things they heard once and never applied. This is where most people stop, not because they are lazy, not because they are weak, because they treated learning as if it were the change itself. Learning is not the change. Learning is the map. The change happens in the terrain. The terrain is your next conversation, and the conversation after that, and the one after that. You will forget most of the specific sentences you heard in these 10 chapters. That is normal. You do not need to remember them. You need to remember one thing at a time, one skill at a time, one day at a time. The pause before you speak, practiced for a week, will do more for you than remembering every word of chapter 4. The one open question asked in your next conversation will do more for you than remembering every word of chapter 7. The specific piece of feedback, delivered well tomorrow, will do more for you than remembering every word of chapter 9. The skill lives in the doing, never in the knowing. I learnt this the hard way. I spent years collecting information about communication. I read the books, I attended the seminars, I nodded through the trainings, and my actual conversations stayed exactly the same because I never treated any single insight as something to practice for a week. Then one day I stopped collecting. I picked one skill, the pause. I practiced it for 7 days. At the end of that week, one conversation in my life had already shifted. Then I picked another skill. I practiced it for 7 days. Another conversation shifted. That is the entire story. There is no magic. There is only the quiet work of picking one thing and staying with it long enough for it to become who you are. The people around you deserve a version of you who communicates better than you did yesterday. Your partner deserves it. Your parents deserve it, while they are still here to receive it. Your children deserve it. Your colleagues, your friends, and the strangers you will meet in the years ahead all deserve it. But the person who deserves it most is you, because you are the one who has been walking out of conversations with the quiet ache of having left something unsaid. You are the one who has been carrying misunderstandings you did not know how to repair. You are the one whose ideas have stayed inside your head when they belonged in the room. You do not have to keep carrying that. The 7 skills are the way out. The daily habit is the road. The truth is, in 5 years, you will have had roughly 100,000 more conversations than you have had today. 100,000. Each one is a small opportunity to practice. Each one is a small deposit. By the time you are 5 years further into your life, the compound effect of those deposits will have built something. The question is only what. If you practice, it will build a person whose communication is one of the most valuable assets of their life. If you do not practice, it will build another 5 years of the same conversations you are having now. Both paths take the same amount of time. Only one of them takes deliberate attention. So choose, not dramatically, not with a big vow you will forget by Friday, just with tomorrow morning. Choose one skill. Practice it once, then wake up the day after and do it again. That is the whole thing. That is the entire audiobook in one sentence. Choose one skill, practice it once, then do it again. The rest of your life, if you are willing, is built out of that sentence. I have said what I came to say. The recording ends here. The practice begins now.